This is episode 98 of Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash. Today, I'm talking with Brittanie Gold of Get Food Therapy and Upschool Children's Cooperative. But before we get to that, I got to say thank you to my Dank Podstash super supporters, Maxwell, Dave, and Dennis. You guys keep the show running along with the rest of the patrons as well. Of course, I can't thank you guys enough. If you're interested in helping me keep the show going, getting some support over this way, you can go to patreon.com/thedankpodstash, and you can always like, share, comment, subscribe on YouTube, all that stuff. I appreciate all of it, so thank you. The Dank Podstash is officially sponsored by Project Sparta. Now's the time to get healthy and in shape. Greg Papanicholas is going to get you there with personalized meal plans, training, group support, and tons of amazing fitness and motivational resources and knowledge, including the Project Sparta Facebook group. You can go to projectspartacoaching.com and learn more about Greg's work and get started on your path to health. In this crazy world we're living in, our health is more important than ever. Get up, start learning, communicating, and training. One of the most important and often neglected things in life is your physical health. Get to projectspartacoaching.com now and get after it. Shout out to Voluntary Apothecary. Voluntary Apothecary is here to fulfill all your beard care needs. They carry beard oil, mustache wax, beard butter, and more. I only use their beard care products and I love them. You can check out their amazing products at voluntарyapothecary.com. Listeners of the show can take 10% off your order with code DANK at checkout. And Voluntary Apothecary is going to be doing a giveaway for my episode 100. So keep your ears out. You're going to get something cool. The Dank Podstash is teaming up with Road to Anarchy for a monthly newsletter and more. Road to Anarchy is an online magazine connecting groups of voluntary individuals who are looking to increase their freedom from the state. Becoming more self-reliant and developing a better focus on becoming a productive individual is the only mission. The only division is against the state. No matter your flavor of anarchy, finding your road to anarchy is the first step to progress. The time is now to put our individual differences aside, join up, and create change. You can go to roadtoanarchy.com to sign up for the monthly zine or to patreon.com/thedankpodstash and get signed up with any tier of support. Check out the Road to Anarchy Facebook page and groups to connect with other individuals on the road to anarchy. Where is your road taking you? All right, y'all, enjoy episode 98, and thanks for listening.
Enemy of the state.
An enemy of the state.
Enemy of the state.
Dank Podstash.
You're listening to Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash. Check out thedankpodstash.com to find every episode of the Dank Podstash, links to support the show via our BitBacker and Patreon, Dank Podstash merchandise, and much more. If you'd like to advertise on the Dank Podstash, email us at dankpodstash@gmail.com.
Zombie presidents, what anarchy! Zombie presidents!
All right, welcome back to another episode of Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash. We are restarting. I gotta say, first time I've had technical difficulties on a start, but it was bound to happen. So, here with Brittanie Gold. Excited to talk to you. We have already been talking a bit, twice now, and like I said, we haven't interacted much beforehand, which is a first. Well, maybe not a first, but close to a first. But it should be good. It should be fun. So, yeah.
I'm excited.
I said
Considerably less excited the second time.
It is, I know. The energy kind of goes out. I fucking hate it. But it is what it is. But I'm going to have you repeat, too, what I asked, too, because I asked in the little questionnaire I sent before when we were talking about doing the episode if you were an anarchist, and you gave the same answer that a lot of people give, that you are an anarchist, but you like to say voluntarist because it's less scary. And you've had conversations with people about that or interactions with people. And I think that's the way that usually goes. But how did it go down with you?
Yeah, so I think whenever I first got to, deciding that I was an anarchist, thanks to Larkin Rose, shout out to you. I was like, oh, that's gonna be really exciting to tell people I'm an anarchist and like a conversation starter, it'll make people feel awkward, which I love. So I started telling people that I was an anarchist, and I started getting from my personal network of people who are actually my friends being like, but I thought you were normal. What do you mean you're an anarchist? And So then I had to be like, wait, not like the set everything on fire type of anarchist. Like that's just movies. And, you know, then I started saying, maybe it's easier just to say I'm a voluntarist so that they can go, well, what is that?
Mm.
And then I can explain it to them without them going, oh, you're an anarchist, you know? So
Yeah.
I feel like I could get myself in there, like sneak myself in real nice a little bit better.
Real nice. Very nice. Yeah, no, I'm with you on that. I kind of go with anarchist. I usually just say agorist because that's the thing I like the most is agorism, and that people are like, what the fuck is that? They're really confused when that comes up, but that's something I've been thinking about quite a bit is moving away from the term anarchist. And I'm rebranding the show coming up here soon. Different name, less memey, less anarchy right in your face stuff, more opening up a conversation with people outside of the anarchist sphere. Because, you know, we can only talk at each other so much. I think the outreach is what we need. Otherwise, it's the purity spiraling that we always see. Plus, like you said, people already have the preconceived notion of what an anarchist is, setting trash cans on fire and stuff. I think that's something that might have to be abandoned at some point is the word anarchist.
Yeah, totally. I agree. Sucks, but
yeah. I mean,
just deal with it. But like you were saying about agorist, like I think people don't have preconceived notions. So again, it gives you the opportunity to like explain it to them, and they're like, "Oh, that makes sense. Okay," you know, instead of like, "No."
Well, yeah, and with Trump saying he's going after professional anarchists, and then all the people that who knows what they are that are doing things under the banner of anarchy during the outside of the peaceful protests when they're starting to destroy shit. There's a lot of people claiming anarchists and stuff like that, and it's just like I don't know if it's salvageable. I can't remember what term. When I was talking with Pete Quinones, he was talking about some term they were abandoning. Besides abandoning the Libertarian Party, again, they were moving away from other terms, and he's now doing, I think it's called Unloose the Goose with a few other guys, more agorist-focused podcast. Seems like agorism is on the upswing in popularity again, which is awesome.
Yeah, totally. I think it's the fastest way to non-collapsitarianism, I would say, right? Mm-hmm. So, it's like out-innovate the system. Don't criticize it, create.
Yeah. And that's the best way. And then also, too, you have a couple businesses, couple projects that you work on. So if you're branding with in-your-face anarchy in these times when people have like we said, the preconceived notion that might not brand so well, it might not transfer so well to getting people to interact with those.
Totally. I think anarchism in general is kind of like that in the sense of like, well, then people have, like you said, the preconceived notion, and then it limits your ability to market yourself. And it's like, I actually don't know. I mean, maybe one person who's within like a 20-mile radius that is, claims to be an anarchist and is an anarchist, that actually like I've interacted with. So it's like, if that's my market, like I'm not going to reach very far. I'm going to get one person to, and it's like, it takes money, it takes resources and capital to grow yourself in order so that you can have a voice and grow the movement. And I would much rather have people be like, oh yeah, I'll listen to you. And then kind of like, they like me as a human, and then I can sort of sell them the ideas versus, hey, here's the ideas. And they're like, yeah, no, I'm not being called an anarchist. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly. I get that completely. And so I'm always very interested in businesses like you described. And I don't understand them very much. You're the expert in the field, but Get Food Therapy. Tell me about that. Because I'm always interested in health, and then your other one with Upschool, Children's Cooperative with learning and health. I think it's very interesting, and it definitely connects with anarchy. But I want to hear you describe how that stuff does.
So Get Food Therapy was like basically me reclaiming my like ability to eat non-coercively, because I think in America, the standard American diet is it creates compulsive eating. And we kind of all eat to live, and it's sort of this like social and emotional experience as opposed to food being fuel.
Hmm.
And I wanted to kind of bring people back to basics and teach them how to think about food because, as you know, like thoughts, create words, create action. So it's like if you're thinking about food the proper way, then you can talk about food the proper way and you can consume food the proper way. So for me, it was really important to free my personal self because I was literally a slave to the standard American diet and dieting in general. I was like, the fat kid in my family. Even though I really wasn't, I was inflamed from eating inflammatory foods, but it just so happened that all of my, siblings just carried it on the inside and were sick. And I just was like seemingly okay and was very fat. And I wanted to like not live that life. And I was like, I'm willing to do anything. And I started eating a grain-free, sugar-free diet and it kind of took off from there. And I was like, hey, I'm sure other people would love to like get unstuck or get rid of that mindset of like, I am just a big person or I'm big boned or like I have big genes or whatever story it is that they tell themselves because they compulsively eat.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay. So is it like counseling or information sessions with people? Like, how do you work that?
Yeah. So, I mean, it varies client to client. Like some people have more of the need for the like emotional contact. Like they just need reassurance. They need someone to be in their corner cheering for them. They need accountability. And then on the other side, on the flip side, there's people who need like meal plans. Like they don't know how to cook for themselves at all. They don't know how to make something that they could even deal with eating because they're so used to eating, McDonald's cheeseburgers every single day. So it's like teaching them like, oh, this can be delicious, but it's also like healthy for you and will make you feel better. It'll get you out of the brain fog. And like more and more parts of me believe that the addiction to food is one of the ways that people are satiated, but with, statism, because if you're in such a food coma or you're just going from meal to meal, like seeking, sugar seeking and, corn syrup seeking, then you're not critically thinking about, who's in charge of you? What are you doing with your life? Like, are you giving 9 to 5 to the man? Like, you're not thinking about anything else. You're just thinking about like, okay, on my way to work, I'll get a Starbucks and then I'll, get this Burger King and then I'll, go pick up a sandwich that's mostly bread. And, like you'll just not be thinking about how those things are affecting your body.
Yeah. That's, and that's completely true. My ears kind of peaked up when you said inflammation, being inflamed from eating shitty food, and then that feeling of food coma of just nastiness all day. My buddy Robert Rex convinced me to give carnivore a shot with him for 30 days. I started a little later than him. I feel fucking amazing and definitely less bloated and inflamed for sure. Like it's like coming out of a haze. It's like when I had been drinking a lot before I moved up here to Washington and quitting cold turkey. It's like, whoa, waking up again. This is not as intense, but I don't know. It's just crazy. I feel lighter, I guess. I feel like I'm walking around, not getting dragged
totally. And
to
you
the
realize
ground.
how, right. And you've realized how it's almost like one of those things you can't see it. Like it's like a fish doesn't know it's wet. Like you can't see that you are dull and that you did. Like I see people like, I don't have brain fog. I don't get sick when I eat grains, but I'm like, okay, exclude it for 30 days.
Yes.
And then you'll feel it. It's something that you have to actually do before you get the results. You have to believe that the results are on the other side kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're 100% right that people like they don't really think about the crap that they're eating if they're eating shitty stuff, or even if you're eating something good and it's not working for you. Like I've done some paleo stuff before and I still didn't feel great. I think I was doing it pretty well. It was pretty strict paleo, almost to keto, and I'll probably go back that route at some point, but I like the elimination start, I guess. That's really awesome. So, and do you have like a specific model, a specific diet model that you use with people, or do you kind of work with them to figure it out?
So I'd say my standard for people, because I just think it works really well in most cases, is like a keto, a very low carb keto with lots of green vegetables and supplementation, just to sort of like get some kind of foundation in, not being that addicted to sugar and grains. And then from there, it's kind of flexible to the person. So some people can deal with carb cycling. Some people can tolerate honey and not feel terrible. So they can do some more like higher glycemic carbs. But for the most part, I do try to stick to the low carb end, just because so many of our carbs that we intake, like culturally, are so heavily pesticided, so grown in soil that has no nutrients and micronutrients. So we're all super deficient in so many, minerals and so many vitamins that it's hard to get to say, oh, you could eat just a whole food diet, which is true. You can and be healthy, but you have to be so careful about how you choose things. And that's usually an insurmountable task to people. Whereas I say, okay, hey, I know that you're used to just going through McDonald's. So if you can just get a burger without the bun for now, like as a temporary to the long term. And then eventually you can tell the difference between a grass-fed burger and the McDonald's burger. And you can just do the grass-fed burger because you know what it does for you. But people aren't always there in the beginning, right. And I'm someone that I'd rather meet someone where they are and help them get the benefits so that they can be like, all right, yeah, like I can see that this is definitely better, and then I'm like, oh, well, there's another tier to this. Like if you also want to, ditch the industrial grade seed oils, if you also want to ditch, corn-fed beef, and if you know what I'm saying? So it's like, once they see those benefits, obviously as a person, I would say, obviously ethically sourced meats, ethically sourced dairy, raw dairy preferably, are all better options. But I'm also willing to recognize that that's not in everyone's budget. It's not consciously available to people. They're like, I can't do that. That's not normal. So like I said, I like to meet people where they're at and give them the opportunity to build on what they already have and not scare them.
Yeah. And you kind of have to, because it's not a one size fits all thing for anybody. Everybody's different. That's the thing I struggled with the most, trying to figure everything out. It's like, for fuck's sake, there's, everything I find is very generically set up for different diets and workout plans and stuff like that. Greg helped tremendously with customizing a lot of stuff, and now breaking it down to, and that's Greg Papanicholas, by the way. You guys heard in the beginning of the show that he sponsors the show. Yeah, he's awesome. But yeah, now moving to an elimination diet, I think it's helping a lot. And you mentioned the ethical sourcing of your different foods and whatnot. Was that part of what you meant at kind of the beginning when I asked you about this, about non-coercive eating? And I think you explained that a little bit, but that caught my mind. I want to hear more about non-coercive.
Yeah, so I feel like just as a lifestyle approach, when you have a philosophical belief that you're entitled to life and you're entitled to liberty and you're entitled to whatever you believe you're entitled to as anarchists that we do, you kind of start feeling uncomfortable with the idea of these essentially graveyards of animals that are just tightly packed, never see the light of day, never eat on a pasture, never see grass. It's beyond the ethical aspect of it. It is almost it's a part of the chain of, deciding that the outcome is more, the ends sort of justify the means, right? So as long as we can make a lot of meat and get it out to as many people for the cheapest price, then that equals everything we did to get there is okay. And I feel like that's a status mentality.
Yeah.
Oh, well, as long as we can get the road, it doesn't matter that we have to steal from people to make it, right? But it's at least we have the road, though. We need the road, right? And, you and I would both agree, or I say this is true about spanking too. To me, it wouldn't matter if it worked.
Right.
If you told me we can prove on paper every day of the week that hitting your kids leads to them leading great lives and they'll be fine, I would still not do it because ethically I feel it's wrong. So the ends don't justify the means to me. Mm-hmm. So it's the same thing with food. The ends don't justify the means. So in order to live that as a lifestyle, I believe that, the means of producing animals to eat and what you're consuming And that's beyond like going to the spirituality and the energetics of eating something that's miserable its whole life,
Yeah.
and their hormones that they're releasing and stuff. But even just on a basic philosophical level, like it just always felt wrong to me. So I advocate for that
Yeah.
personally.
Absolutely. I'm hoping that with the upswing in, the popularity of raw dairy and grass-fed meats and whatnot, that these places that are producing them are getting a lot of business and expanding. It seems like you see it more and more. I don't know what it would take for them to kind of take over the industry. I think that'd be pretty hard. I think it would take a shift in consciousness of people in general, and personal responsibility with even growing a garden or something like that, because I think that is when people grow a garden or maybe even raise a meat animal or chickens or something like that, they get a really great look into what's going into it, and then things at the store prepackaged look a little different.
Absolutely, I agree with you. And I think, like you were saying, it would take a shift in consciousness, and not only a shift in consciousness, people would have to be living on less,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I know you probably know this. You were carnivore. I haven't done carnivore keto, but I've done many bone broth fasts. I've eaten as little as 900 calories a day sometimes, not out of like calorie restriction, but just following intuitively what feels right to eat or what doesn't feel right to eat. And people in American culture, it's all about more, right? Like more money, bigger houses, bigger, like bigger pools, bigger cars, nicer cars. It's all about leveling up. And there's not a lot of talk about what if we level down? What if we do less? What if we say no more? What if we, like block out time for our own peace or for our own, so it would take, you're right, a shift in consciousness in accepting that less is better, like eating meat less if you have to have high quality meat. I mean, that's how our family is. Like, if we can't afford the better quality meat, we don't eat the meat. Like, we just don't. So we find other means, or we find a different type of animal, or we find protein from a different source. And rather than just say, well, if we can't get it, we'll just substitute it with something that's really terrible for our bodies. Like, we, generally speaking, just are okay with less. Right. And we kind of were talking about this earlier before we were, recording, but like, that's my thing with people who say, oh, well, I'm a victim of circumstance because of, childcare, whatever else. It's like, no, you're just not willing to say, what am I willing to sacrifice to have the life I want?
Right.
Like when I started my other business, the Upschool Children's Cooperative, I had to I had to acknowledge that I was going to not be able to afford a nice car. I wasn't going to be able to afford to get my nails done. I was going to be able to I was going to barely be able to afford healthy food. It was going to be I was always going to be on edge financially, but I was going to be able to stay with my child full time. And the risk was worth the reward for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that people aren't, people in general, I try not to do the universal we or universal people too often, but it seems like I guess American culture in general is not big into sacrifice. It's instant gratification, and that's another problem to solve for maybe a post-state world, or even just a place with more freedom, is that getting people to either be responsible in their upward growth, or maybe downward growth, the level up or level down, like you were saying, because there's a massive butting of heads economically. We know that, being in the anarchist sphere, when it comes to ANCAPs versus even mutualists, not even ANCOMs. And it always seems it breaks down to me that the more socialist side, more socialist leaning anarchists are into a more subsistence living life, whereas the more ANCAP types are more into, get whatever you can, make a lot of money, do it. That's great. And there has to be a balance. And yet these conversations that go on between them, I can never see one, and I never see them resolve a balance through these conversations either. Because I think people can definitely get by. We can have a good world on more than just subsistence living, but it's how to get there is the question. There's so many big questions that don't have answers.
Right. And I think one of the things that, and I don't want to be, so I don't blame capitalism for this at all, by the way. governments and corporatism, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But like one of the things that in it, when you hide the means of production, not to get all commie on you, but when you hide them and you say, here you go, here are all your chicken breasts in the store, like this is just how they are, there's no mental connection to how it comes to be,
Right.
you know? And it's sort of like, without that, people don't make conscious choices. They just make choices based on convenience, ease of use, all of these things that to me aren't virtues. It's not virtuous to choose something that's easy. It's not virtuous to choose something that's cheap. I guess you can find things that are easy and cheap, but you know, that also sometimes requires time and skill. Like, oh, I can trade my friend because she grows tomatoes and I grow lettuce, but like that's still taking the time and, you know, having the network and the connection to the person. Like that still does require some work on an interpersonal level. But like usually, generally speaking, like things that are easy and cheap are produced because people aren't like really, they're not pulling back the curtain. You know what I mean? They're just accepting the face value of something.
Yeah. Well, distracted by everything that we can possibly be distracted by. And so it kind of comes back full circle to the beginning of what we were talking about with food. It's just the next meal. It's the next thing between all the distractions. Yeah, it's interesting coming out of the fog, even if it's just coming out of the status fog to becoming an anarchist or whatever you want to call yourself, voluntarist, agorist, all that stuff, to you know, the food fog, the alcohol fog, whatever. It's crazy. But I think one answer that I've definitely talked about with other people before, but now we have you on the show to talk about, is education, homeschool, that kind of stuff, because politics are downstream from culture. I love that example, that phrasing for that. And I think that's one of the next big battles that we're going to be facing, not just we as anarchists, but everybody in North America right now with this COVID insanity, the lockdowns. And I saw a thing, there was a little girl that got sent home from whatever grade, however old you are, or whatever grade you're in when you're 7, for sneezing, because they're sending kids home for any mild signs. And it's like, it's a tiny kid. They're going to sneeze. That doesn't mean they're sick, but
their olfactory senses aren't even fully working. Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be wild because people are going to have their kids not in public school and whatever anymore that they're used to, and they're going to have to figure out something else. So now's the time for, I'm assuming, stuff like yours. Tell me about the Upschool Children's Cooperative more. Let's get into depth on that, into more detail on that.
Yeah. So like I was saying to you earlier, I was sort of faced with like, you put your child in mainstream daycare with people who don't share your values, who think it's cool to shame children, put them in corners, like put them in timeout, not talk to them, not engage with their feelings at all, coerce them to do things they don't want to do, force them to apologize. It goes on and on and on. Things that are not consent-based interactions at all. And it's super normalized when it comes to adults versus children. It's finally less common to see it in marriages with men versus women. It's less common now, but it is still very common to see non-consensual interactions between children and parents on a level that's not about safety. That's just really about exhibiting control. And so I was forced to choose whether I was going to just have my child be in those environments because that was the way to make money. Because I was Montessori trained. So that was really, my choice was to go teach somewhere and either have her there, but under another teacher's guidance and pay out, most of my salary in childcare, or, find a way to do something else. And I didn't know what the something else was, but I knew that I wasn't willing to, sacrifice her on the altar of money. So, and I didn't have her dad long-term. So I was on my own to figure it out. And I wouldn't go after him legally for child support because I don't believe in using the government to do your dirty work. So I kept asking, and I kept telling him that it was expensive to raise a child, and was kind of at his mercy. And I didn't let that be the reason why, again, my child had to go be around people that would practice ethical things that I didn't believe in. And I had long said that no one else was going to raise my child, even before I was an anarchist. So I was like, I'm going to do something different. And I nannied for a while, and I was still running into the same thing. Like, I would nanny for a family and they would be like, we know you let your child tell you no, and like, we're not okay with, and this was like my 18-month-old.
Sure.
They're like, we're not okay with our kids telling us no. And I tried to explain to them, like, wow, there are so many instances where you would want your child to be able to say no to another adult, especially an adult that's not their parent, you know? Like a secondary caregiver, like that's like a number one situation where you would want them to be able to have their voice, you know? And so it was just, I was so thrown by it. And there was just tension that just built up over time because they didn't see the world the way I did. And, you know, there was nothing I could do. I needed their money, you know? So all that to say, eventually that turned into me using my, you know, friends and support system to kind of create the Upschool Children's Cooperative, because I was like, there's got to be other people who see that this is wrong, you know, or, you know, have their kids in mainstream daycare and they're like, well, this, you know, they have a special seat that says you need to sit here when you're a bad boy, and like, you know, and that didn't want their kids to be raised that way. So I came up with the concept, and, you know, I put it out there on like Craigslist and like all these places, like, hey, like, I'm knowledgeable. I'm not just someone who took a 40-hour class. Like I have a degree, and trust you with your children, you know? And it was hard in the beginning. You know, I lived in an apartment that was small. It was upstairs. It wasn't in the nicest area. And I really had to sell myself, like just being like, hey, you know, these are my beliefs, and like, this is me as a person. And if you're buying into me as a person, like, this is what you're going to get, you know? And like, I was very, you know, transparent all along. Like, I'm like, this is where I have struggles. This is, you know, what I can give your kid. This is what I can't give your kid. Like, I can't give your kid this like state of the art classroom or these really nice electronics, but I can get on the floor with them. I can play Play-Doh. I can work on their grip and do OT therapy things with them and like engage with their brain and things that will matter, you know, long term. I can love them and show them that like, you should feel safe when you're with your caregivers. Like, you should feel safe and acknowledged and loved and seen. And at the beginning it was slow because, you know, like that's how starting business works. So it was hard and I didn't make much money. I didn't know how to value my services. It was rough. And my daughter is 7 now. So it's been around for about 6-ish years.
Cool.
And it's super successful. I have a waiting list. Like, I'm well known in my community for, you know, providing super high quality care because of my belief system. And it's a really awesome way to teach children how to interact with each other and how to interact with adults with like still having a voice, still being respectful because they're respected.
Right.
You know, people tell me all the time, like, wow, your daughter has such great manners. Like, she does this, or if you ask her to clean something, she just does it. Like, how do you do that? Like, do you have a reward for her? I'm like, no, I just do those things for her. Like, if she asks something from me and I can do it, I give her that. Or, you know, I can explain something better. Like, I sit and try to clean it. If she's really upset about something, I just listen.
Right.
I don't try to make her, you know, mad. I don't try and like force her to think things a certain way or do things a certain way. I just, you know, let her be herself and let her, you know, live her life. And that's the thing that, you know, kids really need nowadays. They need someone who, I'm going to nurse my baby. They need someone who, you know, can be there for them and actually see them and know them. And parents find value in that because their kids aren't like, oh, I don't want to go to that place. You know, they make me feel like I'm a bad kid, or I have to do these things I don't want to do, or I have to sit for circle time and circle time super boring. You know, I've had a lot of, especially boys, come to me after they've been kicked out several centers because these people are like, oh, there's something wrong with your 3-year-old boy that he doesn't want to sit for reading time for 30 minutes. You know, like he's got to go.
Yeah.
Because that's what everyone else is doing. Right. Imagine that a 3-year-old boy full of energy right after breakfast, not wanting to sit down for 30 minutes still with their hands in their lap, you know? Yep. And so, you know, I don't do that. I say, hey, if that's not what you want to do here, go do something else. Yeah. We'll live. What? No. And I mean, honestly, go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to ask, so what age group do you work with? Is there a specific age group or any age?
So I feel like it's ever changing because the world's ever changing. So initially my thought was it'll all be kids around my daughter's age and I'll just continue sort of schooling them, right? Like they'll never go to conventional school. That will just always be this homeschool co-op and all these parents will be in for it. And I kind of figured out pretty quickly that parents love free. So I ended up being more of a preschool program. because you have to pay for preschool. There is no public preschool. So I ended up being more of a preschool program. But as of late, I have 2 kids who are enrolled who are homeschooling, and they are in favor of doing it another way. And they see the value in not sending your kid to something that looks a lot more like a prison than a fun place to learn and build friendships. So, you know, it's been great recently. That's what it's funny because people are like, oh, how are you doing with like COVID? I'm like, honestly, great. Like I hate to say that, but like, you know, people acknowledge and appreciate and validate what I'm doing so much more now because they can see like, wow, you're not willing to put, you know, 2, 3, 4-year-olds in masks. I'm like, no, never.
Yeah.
There's never a chance, like 0% chance. The government would have to come in here and put me in handcuffs. Like I'm not doing it,
Well,
you know?
yeah.
And I think
good luck, you know, having them keep them on too. How can you expect children that?
Oh, that's not even a conversation.
Yeah. What the hell?
Right. But I mean, they just want me, and even it's like, I've actually had people tell me, like other providers, well, you know, you can just put the signs up or you can just say they have to wear them, but once they get inside, they can take them off or you don't have to. And I said, no, that's against my ethics. Like, I'm not going to say, oh, sure, I'll do it and not do it. Like, I'm just going to say that doesn't fit for us. It doesn't work for me. I don't like that. It doesn't make sense to me. We're all healthy. Like, I'm not going to put, you know, I'm not going to treat healthy children like sick children ever.
Sure.
Like that's never going to happen. And I've been open the whole time. I never closed. Kids were continuing to come here when there were lockdowns, when there were shutdowns, when you can only go to the, you know, there's curfews. Like, nope, we had the same setup here and we've had like no issues. Oh, sorry. My child.
Yeah.
But we've had like no issues at all, you know, just having kids come. You know, no one's been sick. It's been fine because, again, we provide super healthy food. We make sure everyone is taking supplements. Like I'm in constant communication with the families. Like it's you know, they're not away from the means of production. They're not outside of the hiring process. Like if I'm going to hire an assistant, I'm like, hey, this is my idea. This is her qualifications. She seems like she'd be really great. It would help me, you know, reach the kids more and do more with the older children, whatever. And so through that, like since they can see what I'm doing, they can see the food that I'm buying, they can, you know, since they're a part of it, it's easy for them to relax and be like, okay, my child's going to grow fine here, be fine here. Like this is a healthy situation, you know? So that's what it has been now. And I've actually started a spin-off group specifically for parents who don't want their kids in masks, where we're actually doing ages 4 to 10, like more of like classroom style. But again, it's all consent based. You know, it's kind of gray market, like it's under the radar. We have people signing NDAs because we're like, you know, this could get sketch, you know, and the government could decide that it sucks and, you know, whatever. And I'm like, we can't risk it, you know, like these are our lives. Like these are our, you know, our personal liberty is on the line to do this thing for you that you need, you know, you need someone to watch your kid and teach them things and because you don't want to do it and that's okay. And I think that's something that parents don't realize too. Sometimes it's like, it's not all public school and we have to have the government paid situation or, you know, you got to pay $1 billion. Like we made it as low cost as we could. We, you know, we're like, if you can swap, if you can offer us anything, if you can come teach something, like there's ways to make it to where it's still reciprocal and everyone feels like they're getting what they deserve out of it, but it's not all just like this super expensive private school situation, you know? And like, I want parents to have options. I've offered parents, you know, scholarships or whatever I need to do because if they're really a fit for my program, like I don't want them to be like unable to come because of their financial situation, because I've been in those situations, you know, I really know what that's like. Yeah. So.
No, it's glorious.
And I feel like being that symbol.
I love the gray market stuff so much because it's that bridge, you know, to status, to white market stuff like that. I love it so much. And, you know, all you gray marketeers, all the gray marketeers are always so freaking creative. Just I'm enthralled listening to all the different stuff you do. I love the barter idea, the trade, making it affordable and all that. It's freaking sweet. It's so important. Like I barter for most of the sponsorships. And you can only do that if you're in a gray market. Yeah, you can. You really can. And yeah, it's always in the gray market unless you're somehow paying taxes on your barter. But you're focusing on consensual interactions with kids in these scenarios, right? So that's something that seems to really rile people up when it comes to raising kids, teaching kids, all that stuff. And I don't understand it. It wasn't even in my head before I started hearing people talk about that. I was like, oh, yeah, well, that fucking makes sense. And I think the first time I heard it was when someone's like, don't force your kids to give Aunt so-and-so a kiss or a hug if they don't want to. They should be able to make the choice to do that, as you're leaving the family gathering or whatever. And I was like, huh, yeah, why would you force a kid to do that? But I want to, so why do you think that makes people so freaking mad when you say you're giving kids those choices, when you're letting them consent or not consent to
Oh,
things?
yeah. I've actually been mocked by people in my own family for saying that children should be able to give consent, or like this shouldn't happen because my child didn't consent to it. I think it really comes down to when you feel really out of control with your life. And I think we all do to some degree. I mean, especially if you're an anarchist, you're living in a statist country, there are laws, like you could be put in a cage, you could be killed. Like this is a reality that we live in. And I think so much of what contributes to how we interact with people is below the conscious level, right? So it's like if all of your things are controlled, like you have to go to work because you have to pay money, because you have to like live in a place, and that's how you get electricity. And there are all these like have to things that you kind of almost, it just spills over naturally, right? So it's like, well, I don't get to choose whether I wake up and go to work in the morning, so you're not going to choose whether you get Lucky Charms or, scrambled eggs. Like it's almost like it's just sort of a reflection, being a mirror to what you're experiencing, and you just push that back into your kids' lives. You're just like, all right, well, I was forced to do all these things, so now you're forced to do all these things. There's no real methodical, like, it's no one intellectually says, oh yeah, well, when my kid goes to leave, they better give this person a hug or they're wrong. Like I don't think anyone intellectually thinks that, but it's almost like it's just boils over from just, well, that's the way I was raised and I have to do things I don't want, and like this is good for them, and they don't think about any of the negative consequences of, well, actually when you normalize the kid not giving consent, then how are they going to know if they're molested or all these other things that are really super scary? How are they going to know that they didn't consent to that if they didn't consent to giving kisses to whoever? And I was raised in a Southern family, and I do remember being like, you can't leave.
Right.
Oh, before you go with so-and-so where you want to go, you got to give a kiss before you leave. And it was really like that. And I think in your own head as a kid, you're just like, oh, that's normal. We just do that. And I literally didn't want to. I remember feeling like skeeved about it.
Yeah.
Like, ugh, that person smells bad, or like that person always like hugs me too long. Like, I don't know, like just not liking it.
Yeah.
And just being like, oh, I guess I have to do it. And I also think too, for my dad, who was super physically abusive, I think that was kind of his way of being like, it's fine that I'm physically abusive because I'm also like extremely affectionate, and not realizing that was like trauma bonding.
Yeah.
And I feel like, for me, it was always really important to me, because I was raised in an abusive home, to make sure that my child never felt, probably almost to an extreme, that she was being forced to do anything, or like she wasn't being respected.
Right.
So like we have like a thing in our family where my husband and my daughter will play sometimes, like my 7-year-old, and they'll like play fight or like Nerf guns or something like that. And she'll get to the point where she's like, oh no, don't do that, blah, blah, blah. And like we have a thing where it's like, I'm not having fun anymore, and that just stops everything right there. So that she can still be playful and be like, oh no, you're gonna get me kind of thing, and it's still fun. And then, but there's a cutoff. It's like, I'm not having fun. Yeah. And if you say I'm not having fun, the other person has to stop immediately what they're doing. Like it doesn't matter if you're being tickled, if you're pillow fight, anything. Like there are words that we say, and I tell people in my family. We just had this conversation with my mom last night. She was like, my stomach kind of hurts. I don't really want to play this game. I said, so you need to tell her you're not having fun anymore. Yeah. Because like she might not know, she might think you're being playful, but if you say that, she will know that you're not joking and it's serious. And for me, that was an important thing to raise her with, so that she knew if her consent was actually being violated or not.
That's
like giving
genius.
her clear ideas of what that was.
Yeah, that's great. That's really important. And you mentioned the trauma bonding, and I was thinking about the spanking issue and passing on trauma, I guess, because people always say, oh, it worked for me, so it'll work for them, or this is why we have such a messed up world now, all these young people in the streets, because we ain't spanking them. And it's just, I've worked with a guy.
I always love showing them the
sorry, I was just gonna say, I worked with a guy who that was his thing. He always said that, and I showed him that flow chart of reasoning versus hitting a kid, And you just said, and he just kind of, you saw the lights dim in his eyes. He's like, well, I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, and just kept going. I was like, come on, man.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, anyone who holds, it's a superstition, right? It's like statism. Like it's just a belief that you hold. It doesn't have any basis. So as soon as you're questioned, you're like, oh, actually, I'm just doing it because I want to. Like they're not actually doing it for a reason. So for me, like that's basically my whole thing with spanking too, is like, I was spanked as a child, but I was like more than spanked. But I do know people who were like just spanked. Like it was like worst case scenario. They were like told they were loved and they didn't want to do this and all this stuff. So it's like I've seen the gamut. So it's not just like I'm like, oh, I'm like lumping everyone in together. I know there are some well-meaning people who spank for sure. Well-meaning, I mean, still practically is not doing their child any wellness, but yeah, I realize that it can come from a well-meaning place. But my thought is always like, well, is there any situation that you could think of as an adult where it would be okay to hit you to teach you a lesson?
Right.
And like every single adult human's like, well, no. Like, guess, well, what if you just were on, you're on your 27th shot and I was really worried about you? Like, can I hit you then? I said, okay. And they're like, well, no, like you can't hit me. Like maybe just take it away from me or, trap me in a car or something, but like shut me into a cab, but don't hit me.
Right.
It's like every adult can like draw the line and realize like, hey, actually hurting people isn't a super cool way to handle things. Or like, I'll say like, well, they don't know what's best for them. And I'll be like, oh, have you ever felt like your husband or wife, like just didn't really know what's best for them? Like, you were like, you made them a salad for dinner. They didn't eat any of it, but then they came back from the gas station with a Kit Kat. They're like, oh yeah, that's happened to me. I'm like, well, do you ever like want to hit them? Because they're just really not doing what's best for them. You know what I mean? Like, and it's just, people are like, oh, I mean, of course not. I'm not going to hit them for the Kit Kat bar. Like, like that's not a way to handle it. You got to do it through relationship and connection. I'm like, there you go.
Boom. Yeah.
It's almost like if you say true things, then people will listen.
Yeah, maybe. Sometimes they get angry. I noticed that people, when it comes to the spanking argument, people always say, they fall back on like, well, they should associate something dangerous with pain, so they don't do it, and they act like they won the argument. And it just seems so simple to me that if they can't reason, if they're not old enough to reason, then it's not doing anything. If you can't reason with them, hitting them isn't going to do anything because they can't figure out why you're hitting them. And vice versa.
Like it does condition them. I mean, it does condition them. So I think that's the difference. Is like, do you believe in like conditioning your child versus teaching them? So it's like, as long as the person agrees with me that they realize that they're treating their child like a rat in a cage and they are like electrocuting them over. And I'll say that. Well, would you be willing to electrocute them? Yeah. It would have the same outcome.
Yeah, just a little shock.
Like, would you be willing to like force them to skip a meal because that would also have the same outcome?
Right.
And of course, they're always like, no, that would be abusive. And it's like, well, where do you draw the line? If conditioning works and conditioning's okay, then we can condition any way we want. Well, it's like, well, no, this is just the traditionalistic way that was passed down to me by my parents. It's the only way I know. Like, and that's why you're doing it then. Like, let's just be honest and have a frank conversation. And I love the Jesus-y people who get to me in on it. Like, those are my favorites. So I'm like, listen, you're looking at someone who went to church like 6 hours a week for 20 years. So if you want to have that conversation, we can have it, because I'm pretty sure disciple is the word in discipline. And I don't remember Jesus beating anyone up to get them to like learn a lesson. He wasn't like, Peter, you're going to deny me 3 times. So for that, I'm going to beat you, give you 3 spanks for each of the times you're about to deny me. And that'll curtail this bad situation from happening.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, that didn't happen because it's not a thing.
Right. Well, and
it doesn't work.
It's such an obvious parallel between conditioning children and statism, because you're conditioned in school. People are conditioned to do everything. That's how the government works. So it's only logical that breaking that chain is going to break the links further up the line and have more freedom. And like we said at the beginning of the show, culture or politics being downstream from culture. It's completely necessary. I'm definitely looking forward to. I have no idea which style yet, because I know there's a bunch of different styles of unschooling, all that stuff, because I don't have kids yet. But someday, I think that's going to be extremely important. I cannot imagine sending kids to public school.
Yeah. Oh, it's so bad. I mean, so my original education plan was I was going to go for like mainstream public education, and my college had like the best program with all the local schools to like get in and like see it firsthand and like be involved. And during my internship, I literally saw a teacher calling autistic children names, like behind their back, obviously not like saying like you bad kid, but like would go to me and be like, oh, I call red shirt such and such, and he always does this, and I always have to move him over here. And like then she would show videos for half of her classes. So I'm like, you're literally getting paid a salary to be a VJ. Like you're just showing a video that came from the Common Core textbook, and you're calling that teaching, and you're not reaching them. Like none of it. And then she was like, oh, you know, the pyramids, Egypt. Like I remember learning about that as a kid. That was so fun and interesting. And learning about mummies. Like I remember thinking, wow, that's so fun to learn about. I remember learning about it several times in public school. Public school saved my life, by the way. So this isn't like a saying public school is bad for everyone. If you're in an abusive home and like that's your only way you get like positive interaction with human beings, like it's probably good for you. But I would say that's hopefully in the minority of cases. But I remember learning about it, thinking it was so interesting. And she's like, we're just skipping that. Everyone does it. Like, we don't need to do it in our class. We're just going to skip it. And I was like, it's the best thing. Like, what do you mean we're going to skip it? And she's like, yeah, we're just skipping it. So she would just skip 30 pages of the text. She's like, out. They already know about it. And I'm like, okay. So I just could never get down with it.
I got the opposite of that. I got, you know, Greek and Roman stuff. Just, that's all the history I learned. No history of the Americas. Yeah, and it's just like, holy shit, can we learn something else? And now I'm finally over my hating it from having it rammed down my throat for so many years that I'm looking into it myself. I'm like, I didn't learn anything anyways. They didn't teach me anything.
Right.
The heck?
Yeah, and you're like, actually, wow, I didn't know any of this stuff. Yeah, I feel the same way about like the American Revolution, slavery. Like I actually didn't learn any of the actual facts. Like I learned like names and dates. And none of it had any bearing on anything. But yeah, no, totally. So because of that experience, public schools, like I was like, that's a no for me. And especially in Florida, like it's like we're known for being like 48 of like 50 states in terms of like how good our education system is. So, and that's not to degrade teachers either. I know some really wonderful, amazing, loving teachers, but it's just like the system doesn't allow you to have very much flexibility. And, you know, you have so many kids to one person. Like right now, our maximum at our co-op for, we're doing age mixing too, which means that we're not even teaching one type of material to one age kid. We have 10 to 1. And that is the absolute max you would ever even think about taking, because you can't reach every kid if you have more kids than that.
Sure.
Like, period. The end. And, you know, in the public school, you don't have a choice. They're like, well, we have all these kids, and like, we got to just put them in chairs and like make it work, you know? And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm not forcing my child to be a number. And like, it's funny because my kid is a squeaky wheel. Like my kid would be fine in public school, really. Because she's like, hey, what about, but I didn't think, but who, you know, like that's the kind of person that she is. So she would have been fine. But I know for myself, like there are things about her, like she didn't start really, really reading till this summer, and she's 7. And in school, that would have been like, she's behind, you know, she needs to go see a reading specialist, like all these things, because she just didn't do it on the timetable of the people. She was way too interested in, you know, watching things explode and putting things together and examining bugs and lizards. Like she was more interested in that, you know? And I saw that. And I mean, if you communicate with her, she's brilliant, and she was very verbally intelligent. So I just never worried about it. I'm like, well, if she didn't know any words and had no vocabulary, I'd be like, well, maybe she needs to be reading more. And she loved to listen to books, and she loved so many other things that had to do with learning that I just didn't worry about it. And so like now she's really reading a lot. Everyone's like, wow, that's so great that she's reading a lot. Like, did you change what you were doing? I'm like, no, you're doing the same thing. Like it just genuinely based on her interest. Like she's there now, you know, and I don't have to force her to do it.
That's wonderful. Because, you know, if you had sent her to a specialist or something and she hated it, then there goes reading for life. And reading is one of the most important things
forever.
To me, you know?
Yeah.
I hate that.
Absolutely. And if you create a negative association or force with something, kids always are like, no, this is like, I feel that same way about church. Like now I go to like a private, like small little, and it's not even a Bible study. It's more like a spiritual study. And we study lots of different things about spirituality and stuff. And I love going, and I look forward to it, and I want to go, and I like move things around in my life to make it. And it's just like a couple friends of mine, you know, but as a kid, I was forced to go every week, you know, couldn't take a week, couldn't take a day off. I would come like hammered drunk from the night before, you know, sitting there, like trying to keep my eyes open, reading the Bible. And like, it was terrible. It was like, why would you do that to someone? How is that helpful? How is that healthy? Like it destroyed. And then, so then at some point I was like, I'm an atheist now, you know, because I was like, all of this sucks because it was forced on me. Whereas like with my daughter, like we've just had open communication about it. Like, this is what I believe. Like, what do you think about that? You know, like, and I'm like, I won't send her somewhere. I won't send her somewhere. I was like, you better repeat this and like know it in your heart and know it in your head and believe it to be true. And, you know, whatever, think you're a terrible, sinful person, you know, like I don't want her to have that experience at all. Like I want her to be like, wow, this is all great. And it makes me feel great and loved and everything's awesome. Instead of doing what I did was just throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, all of it sucks, you know? And then I felt really scared and lost for a while because I was just like, well, I know I don't believe that. And that's the only thing, you know? And then this feels really terrible and like existentially dreadful. And so I was like, what is it? You know, is there anything else? And there is lots of other stuff.
Oh yeah.
But in my mind, it was like a everything or nothing, because that's the way I was sort of raised, of like, you better think this way. And there wasn't any opportunity to question and like test out ideas. And so, yeah, for me, it was just like, no way. Like, I don't ever want to push something on my kid that isn't her own idea or doesn't sound like a good idea to her, you know?
Absolutely. Have you helped anybody?
And she still believes in the tooth fairy.
Oh, tooth fairy's fun. It's just
because she wants to.
Yeah.
She wants to. She literally wants to. I'm like, what do you think? She's like, I think it's real. I'm like, cool.
Yeah.
Like, you know?
Yep.
I'm not going to tell you what to think. Like you'll be old soon enough, and none of that will make any sense to you.
Exactly. Yeah. There's no reason to
I found
burst
open
that
tabs up. I found open tabs up on her laptop. Was like, is our leprechauns real?
Awesome.
So that one was destroyed. So I feel like everything else is falling down. But
got to get her to the Hobbit.
We got the tooth fairy for now.
I was going to ask, have you helped anybody else start up co-ops based on your methods anywhere else?
So I got burnt really hard
Ooh.
Trying to do that once a couple years ago. Like really tried really hard, like gave all this information, invested all this time. And the girl was pretty much like, yeah, never mind, I really can't. And and this was after I was like getting leads for her, like doing all this work. And then I had to tell all these people associated with me, like, hey, I know I promised you a thing that was coming and it was going to be really awesome, but like now it's not and it's gone. So I think ever since that, I'm like, yikes, but I would love to. If it was the right person and the right fit, like I would totally be down to like teach them my methods and help them figure that out for themselves too.
Heck yeah.
For sure.
The more stuff out of the mainstream that pops up, the better. Let's decentralize more. But we blew through that hour. Do you want to tell people where they can find your projects and stuff before we head to that quick Patreon video?
Yes, I am on the evil social medias. So you can find me on Facebook, Fedbook, at Get Food Therapy, and at UCC Tampa Bay. That's where I live. That's where Upschool is. And on Instagram, at Upschool Tampa Bay, and at Get Food Therapy on Instagram. Otherwise, you can find me online at getfoodtherapy.com if you don't have the social networks. And contact me through there, and I'm always down to chat. My school does not have a website currently because I was investigated by the government and I had to get rid of it temporarily. So that'll be back in eventually when I get around to rebuilding it. But for right now, you're going to have to just contact me personally.
Yeah, and send me the links for all those, and everybody listening, I'll have those in the description so you can just click on them, and there you go. We'll find exactly where they are. Awesome. That was a great conversation. I can tell you really love everything that you do. You get really animated and passionate about it, and that's really, really, really good. Really fun to talk to people who love what they do. Thanks everybody for listening. It was great to have you on. We're going to jump into that Patreon after hours, and if you're a patron, you know where that's at. If you're not a patron, go to patreon.com/thedankpodstash, and you'll get to see a little more time with Brittanie. All right, we'll see you then. Remember, everybody, total freedom, no exceptions. Enemy of the State's Dank Podstash is sponsored by Project Sparta. Go to projectspartacoaching.com to learn more.